All right, what's up, everyone? Just going to allow a few students to join before I get into this live stream. This is a final HSC exam specific Q&A, but it's also a chance for me to provide some students with some feedback on their essays that I'm sure will help all of you. So just going to let a few people join before we get into it, see if there are any initial questions. But otherwise, this should be a very fruitful exercise, at least if you're watching, because we will go through some very practical tips on how you can polish your essays right before the final exams. They are fast approaching. Let me know if you're in the live stream, by the way. Send me through a message, say hello, and we will get into it. I'm going to go through some student responses live. I'm going to provide some very important tips for preparing for the final exams in these last few weeks. Only a few weeks until English starts, so it's very important that you are doing the right things each and every week leading up to those exams. Not to mention for your other subjects as well, but that's all part of it. So hopefully you have created a schedule. Hopefully you are thinking very carefully about how you're studying, what you're looking at each day, when you're looking at each subject each day for the subjects you are looking at. All of these things are very important for your preparation. So if you have any questions up front about how to best prepare for the final HSC exams, let me know. Put it in the chat. Because now it is time. Hello, Groovy. Hi, Zane. Great to see you guys. Anyone else who is in the live stream, send through a message. I'm going to go through the student essays in a moment, and I'm going to show you guys how to adapt to any question. I'm going to look at how to quickly break down a question in the context of a time-pressured exam. How do you just see a question and suddenly break it down and apply it to what you have? And how do you polish up your essays so they are in the best possible form that they can be in prior to going into your exams? So let me know if you have any initial questions about preparation. We've got a few weeks until the HSC goes ahead. I think it's about 3 weeks exactly now. So you should all have a study plan. You should have a schedule for when you're looking at each thing. I typically recommend prioritizing 2 subjects per day, but everyone's different. Some students like going through it like a normal school day. They can only focus kind of for 30 minutes to an hour per subject. Maybe you do 90 minutes per subject, and then you need to move to another subject. That's fine, whatever works for you. But I always found that going a little bit deeper into a subject works better. So 2 primary subjects per day is what I would be looking at. And I would start the morning very strategically. I would start with a subject like maths, science, do a past paper. That might take 3 to 4 hours to then review it, identify where you went wrong, clarify those particular areas, note them for the next time you look at it. Then I would have a break. Then I'd go to the second half of the day and I'd do my next 3 to 4 hour block. And that takes you to the afternoon or evening. And then if you can get a couple more hours in that night, maybe to polish your English essays, that's always a good thing to do if you've done the bulk of your English prep. Polish your English essays, go over each sentence, go over each paragraph, try and perfect them. I used to always do that in the evening because I found that, especially a few weeks out from the exam, until I really need to memorize certain elements of my essays off by heart or do lots of adaptation practice, which you should be doing now as well. Until I got to that point, a couple of weeks out from the exam, I found that the most efficient use of my time during the day when my brain was fresh was to do subjects like math, science, economics, content-heavy subjects. And then when I'm a little bit more fried, but I wanted to kind of push through for 2 or 3 more hours in the evening or at night, I would just read through my English essays and just kind of reread, polish, tweak, cut down, right? I would just be doing all of the finessing, the things that are the difference ultimately between a 90 and a 95 plus in English, right? The difference between a low band 6 and a mid to high band 6 is the finessing that you've done with your essays to get them perfect and all of the practice that you've done for adapting to questions, namely by doing lots of practice introductions and topic sentences based on different types of questions. If you just rewrite lots of adapted introductions and topic sentences, that's the most efficient way to prepare you to adapt to any question for all of your essays. Hi, Teresa. Groovy has a question. What time period should we have everything memorized for English by? Okay, well, let's talk about the memorization point. So obviously not everyone memorizes. You don't have to memorize. Obviously, a lot of teachers say not to memorize, right? And I wouldn't go that far to say don't memorize anything. And I also wouldn't go as far to say everyone needs to memorize, okay? But you all need to memorize something to an extent. How you get there, it might be subjective. Like, do you just reread sentences over and over until you can say it off by heart? Or do you just go through the core quotes and techniques and memorize those elements of your sentence? Do you memorize trigger words, certain words that are going to help you remember the rest of the sentence or the ideas? You need to memorize something. Memorizing nothing is silly. You've done all this work all year. Don't leave things to chance. Make sure you have learnt your best material. You know your arguments. You know the structures for each essay, the key points you want to make. And also make sure you know the core ingredients, such as your topic sentences and how you would word that for a draft question. Obviously, your techniques and quotes. You need to know your quotes off by heart and learn them in order. And you should also know a key word or term that links to the quote and the technique that you're using. So you know your evidence that you're going to use for each sentence in order, and you know at least the key term or phrase or point that you want to make in relation to that piece of evidence. That's the bare minimum that I would learn or memorize, commit to memory. And you can memorize by going over each of your responses sentence by sentence like a speech, and you keep saying them out loud without looking down at a printed copy of your essay until you can do that. So you read out a sentence from a printout of your essay, and if you can't say the whole thing without looking back at the sheet, you say it again. And until you get it right, you keep reading it. Once you get the whole sentence right and you can say it out loud without looking at the draft printout, then you go to the next sentence and you do the same process. And once you can say the next sentence, you say both of them together, and you keep going through until you can say the whole paragraph. This is if you wanted to memorize the full thing, but remember, you don't have to do that. It's important just to know those core ingredients, but that's essentially how you could do it one way. The other way, of course, is to do lots of practice questions, to have your core elements written out in a kind of scaffold or draft, and then to practice using those elements like your quotes, the way you explain the quote, the core points in your topic sentences that you want to make, a similarly structured introduction each time that is kind of recycling the same elements but adapting it to different questions. It's by going through lots of different practice questions and using the techniques, the quotes, and the key points that you want to make that you're ultimately going to memorize the essay or become familiar with an essay effectively, even if you didn't go through word by word and memorize it. So you need to learn those things. Now, the original question, I've avoided it. It was, what time period should we have everything memorized by? Well, I would want to be comfortable with all of my materials at least 1 week out from the exam. So that means you have 2 weeks to really familiarize yourself with your 3 essay drafts and your craft of writing piece. You have 2 weeks. You have 3 weeks until the exam, but 2 weeks to familiarize yourself with the essays. And that can be done in those 2 ways that I mentioned. One, actually reading over your perfected and timed and cut down draft essays so that you really get familiar with it and you learn it like a speech and you basically know it off by heart. You can do that process. That might take a few hours. Just do it sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and write it out at the end. But do it by speaking your essay out loud, because you're going to be able to say your essay out loud far more efficiently, far more quickly than writing it out every time. So you need to mix it up by mainly saying it out loud and learning it like a speech, but then consolidating it, because you do remember things better when you write it. You consolidate it by writing each paragraph out once you can say it out loud without looking. So that would be the strict memorization approach, which you don't have to do, but it does help just to get you familiar with things. And then in the next 2 weeks, not only would I do that, but I would also be looking at lots of different questions, let's say at least 3 different types of questions for each essay, and then practicing an adapted version of my essay, my core draft, for those questions. And I really focus on the introductions and the topic sentences. So make sure that the process of learning, memorizing, familiarizing yourself with your essays is done in conjunction with practicing new essay questions. Don't get used to just memorizing and ignoring new questions. You want to memorize, certain key elements. You want to get very familiar with it, so you're not spending any time on the day thinking about your sentence starters and what do I want to say next. You know what you want to say in every single sentence. You need to be that comfortable that you know what is in every sentence, but don't get too married, for lack of a better word, don't get too married to a specific expression. Like, you can say something in 1,000 different ways. On the day, you need to express your point in the way that best fits the question. And that might require you to rewrite a part of it quite substantially. You might need to make significant changes. Usually they're relatively minor, to be honest, especially if you have practice doing it. You'll be able to identify the best parts of your essay or sentences to actually remold because you would have done it so many times, which means it'll be easier and faster for you to do. If you are not familiar with your essay and you get a new question, you are going to find it very hard to find the best part of your sentence to reshape. So being able to quickly spot the best and most adaptable part of a sentence for a given question based on the key terms is a skill that you can develop just by doing a few practice questions for each essay and actually going through that process. That's the really gritty work that no one wants to do. But if you do that for at least 3 different essay questions per draft after familiarizing yourself with the core ingredients of your draft essays, then you're going to be in a really strong position for the exams. Now, in terms of who's in the live stream right now, we've got quite a few of you who learned a valuable lesson in the trials to really commit to cutting down your essay drafts, who ran out of time in the trial exams, or who found that they actually weren't able to write as much as they thought they would be, because it is different on the day when you get a new question and you're under the pressure of the exam. You are rarely able to write as much as you think. So it's really important that before you even familiarize yourself with any essay, you are going through and timing them out. Write each essay out, write the time on a piece of paper. How long did it take you to write out? Not memorize, just looking off a piece of paper, writing it as fast as you can. If you can't write those essays in about 32 to 34 minutes, they are too long. You only get 40 minutes on average for each essay, and you need to adapt to a question that you haven't seen before. So if you want to really answer the question on the day, give yourself the time, the buffer to do that, which means have a shorter draft. Have a shorter draft and make sure you nail the question on the day. So 32 to 34 minutes. If you're a fast writer, 32-minute drafts are a great aim. Your module A might be a couple of minutes longer because you need to jam more in there. So let's say 34, 35 minutes. And then your module C, craft of writing, I would be practicing to do the whole module C, including a 20-mark composition, like an imaginative composition. I would make sure I can definitely do that in less than 30 minutes. If you can do that in less than 30 minutes, I think for the HSC, I could do mine in 26 minutes. 26 minutes, I could do that module C equivalent when I did it. And the reason why I did it is because I knew that I might have to spend more time on the essays, especially like the module A for advanced. I might go over, especially if it's a tougher question and I'm trying to really answer the question throughout, I might go over. So I gave myself even more time to spare for the module C, because you can still get full marks in module C with a slightly shorter response. But with an essay, there's so much stuff that markers want to see that you need to get in as much as you can within that 32 to 34-minute range. And you need to make sure it's complete. You need to have a conclusion. Don't worry about having a great introduction and first half of the essay. You'd rather have a pretty good full essay than a really good introduction and first body paragraph, and then a second paragraph that's unfinished and that trails off because you ran out of time. Okay, so you want to go for consistency and completion. You need to have the whole essay done for each essay. So make sure you have factored all of that in with your timing now. This is the week to all sit down and time each essay once. And then if you're not able to do each essay in less than 34 minutes, okay, maybe if you're just over and you're well practiced in this, you're well versed in adapting on the day and you're confident and you've done it in trials, that's different. But for everyone listening, if it takes you longer than 34 minutes right now this week to write out each essay, you need to cut them down. Reduce your conclusions. Conclusions only need to be 2 sentences. They need to be concise. What do you do in an essay conclusion? People always ask, I just feel like I'm repeating my introduction. How can I make my conclusions better? Here's the key insight. Your conclusion's different to the introduction because it should, firstly, yes, restate the thesis and kind of summarize what you've proven, right? Ultimately, tell us what you've proven in your essay. It's going to be similar to your thesis, But the additional part, the second sentence, if you like, is what does this text leave the reader to think about? What does it invite the responder to contemplate? How does it impact the responder overall? What are we left to consider? That's the key thing. What is the key takeaway from this text? What have the responders learned? Or what is the author asking the responder to do? So it's like, what's that kind of call to action, if you will? What are they asking us to do? Are they asking us to rethink something? Are they asking us to challenge something? Are they demonstrating? Are they teaching us something that we wouldn't have otherwise known that goes beyond the text? So what's that ultimate takeaway, that lesson, or that action that we need to actually fulfill after considering the argument and the point that's been proven throughout the essay? So it's like that takeaway and that responsibility for the responder. What's the responder left to do or left to rethink? Think about that for your conclusions. And if you kind of nail that part, you've got a solid conclusion. Now, just going to go through some of your comments, some good engagement here on the chat. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the live stream. Hopefully I've answered that. What time period should you have everything memorized by? You want to have all of that done in the next 2 weeks and then have a solid week to keep going over your essays and your craft of writing and doing short answer practice, but mainly sitting down and doing practice questions where you rewrite introductions and topic sentences. Introductions, topic sentences, because it's inefficient to write the whole essay every single time to new questions. You want to do that a few times over the next 3 weeks, but in the week before, I would just be lining up questions using the core introduction or draft introduction and topic sentences that I've familiarized myself with. And I'm sure you'll do that to different extents. And then I would practice writing new full introductions and topic sentences that include the key terms of the question in every single sentence. Don't worry if it's sounding repetitive in your introduction. It's better to have too many key terms of the question than not enough. So err on the side of caution there and overuse the words of the question. Don't use synonyms, and practice using them in every single sentence. Non-negotiable. If there are 3 key terms in the question, maybe you're only using 2 at a time, but try and get as many as you can in each sentence and practice doing that. Practice thinking about different ways you could work things in, because no doubt on the day of the exam, if you've done a lot of practice with those different types of questions, questions that are worded differently, like to what extent, or how does this stimulus, how does the extract reveal a certain idea? If you've practiced dealing with those in the next 3 weeks, especially in the week before the exam, then it's going to come a lot more easily and quickly to you on the day of the exam. And timing is going to be everything. So you want to be able to figure out how you can adapt your essays very quickly. Okay. So another question from Zane. Will I be doing live streams next year for year 11? Yes, I'll do live streams for year 11 in perpetuity. I'm going to be doing these things, which basically means forever, but we'll see how we go. In some form, in one way or another, I will be doing something to help. So yes, next year live streams will be on. Now, a lot of you just finished prelims. Great to see year 11 students in here, though, just getting at it. That's great, because you're about to go into year 12. So I'm going to do actually a lot of live streams for the first term of year 12 to really help you guys with your first assessment. So make sure you tune into the channel and check out our YouTube channel for lots of other Common Mod content. Now, I'm just going through comments. What's your make or break? Here we go. Master Poo. All right. What's your make or break when looking at essays? What's your make or break when looking at essays? I mean, okay, I'm going to have to try and deduce what you meant by that. What's my make or break when looking at essays? I mean, if I'm looking at an essay, I'm looking for specificity. So I'm looking for essays. If I was the marker here, I'm just going to interpret this as if I'm the marker and I'm looking at an essay and I'm thinking, is this a good quality essay? Is it a high quality essay? I am thinking, is it specific? Does it say something specific, or is it just repeating the question? Is it just saying vague terms like power and corruption, and it's just listing things that feel important? Is it storytelling? Okay, they're the things I'm looking to avoid if I'm the one writing, and as a marker, I'm making sure that the student hasn't done those things. So I'm looking for specificity. That's the thing that is going to help you stand out if you can be specific every time you argue a point, which means in every sentence of your essay, when you're going through a point or an idea, make sure you don't just say buzzwords or general terms like power, corruption, manipulation, and you just say one of those things and you break it down and you actually say something about it. Are you being insightful? Are you teaching me something by reading the essay? Now, maybe I already know about the text, etc. If I'm a teacher, but still make sure you're being specific and showing that you understand the nuance, the sophisticated ideas in the text rather than just the general buzzwords that are associated with the text. Okay, so an example would be on the power one, common example I use. Don't say things in your essay like, the play explores power. You need to say, the play explores the extent to which or how power can corrupt an individual's moral integrity, thus destabilizing, right? Thus threatening the fabric of society or the collective cohesion of society. Okay, wow. So what have we gone from? Instead of just saying the play explores power, the play explores power, corruption, manipulation. Never ever say that. Never list things. We've said what type of, well, we should say what type of power. So we can say political power or absolute power, psychological power, things like that. We'll specify the type, but we want to say, what's the significance of power? Like, what's the problem associated with it? Oh, well, it can corrupt people's morality. People become immoral when they are overwhelmed, consumed by power. Okay, that's an insight. You've taught me something by telling me that. You're teaching me something about human nature. And you're also telling me the consequence. You should all be asking yourself, so what, to your own sentences. So when you're reviewing your drafts, ask yourself, so what, and make sure you're actually addressing the consequence. Why is this important? Why is this a real issue? So if the text is about how the pursuit of political power or absolute power, like if it's Big Brother in 1984, or if it is for theocratic power or ideological power, unchallenged power in The Crucible, for example, if you're saying that the pursuit of those types of power will actually corrupt one's morality, and then you say the consequence of that is that it threatens the fabric or the cohesion of society, or it threatens the ability to maintain the truth in society or perceive the truth, or it threatens the stability of the familial unit. Like, give me something specific that happens as a consequence of that bad thing, but make sure you're very specific about what that bad thing is. So expanding on key terms and being specific, for me, is the make or break for a Band 6 essay. All right. Thank you, Master Pooh. All right. Best advice for Module C. Module C. So, craft of writing, best advice would be, in terms of preparation, I mean, there's the generic practice doing lots of questions, but right now, what would I be making sure I've done? For the craft of writing, I would make sure I have a draft response for a 20-mark question. So I would first of all start by assuming you're not going to get asked a reflection. I'm not saying you won't get asked a reflection. I'm saying start by assuming you won't. Then draft a full imaginative, discursive, or persuasive, whatever is your preferred text type, choose one. Start by drafting a full 20-mark worth response in response to a sample stimulus or a past question. Draft that up, make sure you're confident with that. And then from that 20-mark version, make sure you've got a short version. So I have an extended version of my preferred draft. I'm just going to say imaginative, but it could be discursive or persuasive. Imaginative and discursive tend to be a lot more popular than persuasive, side note, but that doesn't mean you can't get asked, write a discursive or a persuasive. You could get asked two, you might even get asked one. Very unlikely it's only going to be about persuasive, but never say never, right? So you could get asked about all three as an option or just for imaginative discursive. But what you need to do, first of all, is make sure you've got your 20 out of 20 response for your preferred type. So if you get a choice, you've got to know what you're definitely going to write. Don't be undecided, like, oh, I've got a draft imaginative and a draft discursive. Know which one you would pick if you got the choice. And don't say, oh, it depends on the stimulus. Have a really strong draft that you're practicing with and prioritizing, and then you can have variations based on the other text types that you also practice with. But you need to have that one definite draft that you will pick because that reduces that decision-making fatigue on the day. You just need to know what one you're going to go with if you get the option. If you don't, you need to be prepared for the other possibilities. But have that 20 out of 20 draft, and then have a shorter version, have a cutoff line on the draft, so that there's no questioning on the day or no figuring out on the day where are you going to stop your response if it's only a 10 or 12 marker. So you've got a 20 mark version, and then you should know exactly what the 10 or 12 mark version of that draft would look like. And yes, you can have a draft for Module C, and I would, but you need to be very adaptable to it by practicing different questions with different stimuli, including written and visual. But the point here is you need to have an extended version and then a shorter version in case you get asked for a reflection at the end or some other part. You can only get 2 parts to the question, but maybe you'll be asked about like a comprehension style question that was given a couple of years back. So be prepared for an extended version and a short version of your preferred type, and then have practiced remolding those and have a look at how you would write a discursive or persuasive version of those based on the same issue or idea or concern, or ideally a moment of tension that you've explored in that original piece. So whatever your preferred piece is, there should be a moment of tension that in some way connects to the prescribed text that you studied, that you're learning from, that you're implementing the stylistic features of. And then that core moment of tension, you should be able to express as a discursive and persuasive if you were choosing to do imaginative by default. So have variations, but they should all be about the same thing. And that just reduces the complexity of the preparation. And then, of course, it's going to come down to looking at lots of different stimuli. And and here's the other tip for Module C. Say you've done the preparation and you've got your drafts and you know what your preferred type is, and you also know how you would approach the other 2 types if you got asked that. The key thing on the day is going to be obviously answering the stimulus. Make sure you apply the rule of 3s. The rule of 3s is you need to have a clear, explicit link to the stimulus at least 3 times in your response. The first time should be in the opening, no matter what. So in the opening paragraph, there should be a clear, direct link to what's in the stimulus, even if you're interpreting the stimulus in a metaphorical or figurative way. Then somewhere in the middle, you should have it, and somewhere at the end. And then you can pepper in other references throughout as well. But just practice using it in those beginning, middle, end parts of your draft. No excuses, non-negotiable. And every time you refer to the stimulus, to avoid doing a superficial link, like some people just say one word they see in the stimulus in the opening sentence of their piece, and then they move on and they forget about it. The rule of 3s, you should repeat that to yourselves, is not only do you have to at least link what you're saying to the stimulus 3 times throughout, every time you do it, you have to do at least 3 sentences in that section. So 3 times with at least 3 sentences of clear linkage to the stimulus. And those 3 sentences should obviously build on one another. Maybe you're building a very nice image and you're talking about the senses, the sounds, the images. Lots of short sentences are a good way of doing it as well. But by having at least 3 sentences that build on a link to the stimulus, and you relate that to your original piece or whatever piece you're going with, by having that, it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like you've just jammed it in there and then you've moved back away from the stimulus. It feels more authentic. So just practice the rule of 3s. That means you're going to have at least 9 sentences that have a very clear link to the stimulus if you want to look at it mathematically. Not that you should ultimately, but I feel like the scientific mathematical approach here helps you get to the correct natural outcome, right? Sometimes you need to have a structure, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. You need to have a structure before you can organically do the right thing. So practice that structure, rule of 3s, and make sure when you see the stimulus for Module C, do not think that you have to literally interpret and apply the stimulus and chuck out everything you've prepared because it doesn't match up. The way I interpret a stimulus, I use life. So I've got rule of 3s for how much I should link to the stimulus, and I use life for how to link to a stimulus, which is, do I want to interpret it literally? Maybe, probably not, right? It's unlikely that the stimulus is literally going to be a perfect fit for the draft that you had prepared. The I in life is internalize it. So internalize, make it internal to your character or the experience that you're discussing. So what does that mean? It means it's a thought, it's an emotion, it's a memory. It's something that the character or speaker is thinking about, but it's not something that's literal. Okay. So that means that you can use a metaphor. You can describe something that is a reflection of how the character feels. So the stimulus could be a metaphor for how your character feels. It could also be a memory of something, and you could make that a motif, a memory that keeps reoccurring. That's a good tactic to embed a stimulus all throughout. Make it a memory of something, and it's a metaphorical link to something. So it doesn't have to be literal. That way you don't feel like, oh, my draft doesn't work for this stimulus. So that's literal or internalized. Make it something psychological, something that reflects their emotions or memories. F is figurative, which means you can actually interpret the stimulus figuratively, like it's metaphorical. It's not an actual, like say there's a picture of space. It's not actually space that you need to set your piece in, but maybe space is figuratively how it feels like to be your character or speaker. They feel like they're floating in space. They feel so free, or they feel so isolated. I feel like I'm from another planet. So you speak figuratively, and the way you do it is you use similes. So I would lead into the very start of your piece with, it felt like. And as soon as you say it felt like, I know that you're using a simile and that you're linking to the stimulus in a figurative, not literal way. And then you expand on that simile. You create a more comprehensive image by applying the rule of threes, because you don't just do a simile and then move on. You do a simile, then you continue the image. Tell me more about what it feels like. So, and then the E is externalized. So sometimes you get a stimulus and it doesn't have to say it's an extract or say it's a quote. And the Module C stimulus says, oh, make sure you begin with this quote or continue on from this quote. Continue on from the stimulus. What's in the quote doesn't have to be what your character or speaker said. It could be what they heard someone else say. So we're pushing it off your character because maybe it doesn't work for them with what you've prepared, but it still has to be significant. It's significant. Maybe they're remembering what someone else said to them, or they're hearing what someone else said, and it keeps playing in their head, hence making it significant. But it doesn't have to be your character who says the words in the extract. It could be something they read. It could be something they heard. It could be something they remember. So that's externalizing it away from your character, which makes it far more adaptable. They are literally the most useful tips I can give you for handling Module C. Obviously, prepare a short, concise reflection as well in case you get asked a reflection. Any predictions for Module C? Predictions. Everyone likes predictions. I don't want to be held responsible for you not preparing for something that then gets asked. So I'm wary to give you any predictions. What I feel like I've seen a lot of, though, is the questions asking about two types. So like imaginative or discursive. You might get discursive or persuasive. I haven't seen persuasive really singled out. A lot of schools avoid persuasive. I'm not saying that means they're going to give you that, but have it in the back pocket in terms of being prepared for that possibility. I would highly doubt that you'll get only asked to do a persuasive. Like you have to do a persuasive. It could happen, but what I think could happen instead of that is discursive or persuasive, or discursive or imaginative. I feel like they like having the discursive in there. That's been my impression of late. In the original HSC for Module C, they did just imaginative, and they like having imaginative in there because it appeals to a broader range of students. So it's not like an unfair exam. But discursive, persuasive would be interesting. So I wouldn't rule that out. But I can't really predict beyond that. The other thing I can tell you is that Module C stimuli, like the prompts that you get that you have to respond to, are typically to do with the nature of art or writing itself. So the idea of creativity, where do ideas come from? You know, what's the struggle to write? What's the struggle to create? I think something about art, writing, literature, anything to do with the nature of creating work, and not just novels, but any type of writing or art. I think they like using stimuli that relate to those concepts because a lot of the prescribed texts are about those concepts. So this idea about studying the nature of writing itself knowing how to link to stimuli that are about those kinds of things. There's a good example from 2 or 3 years ago where there's like a barbed wire fence, or there is a fence and there's like a pencil on the other side, or there's some kind of feeling of being entrapped or imprisoned, or it's conveying the struggle to write, the struggle to be free. Maybe it was about free speech, but you could have linked it to the nature and craft of writing itself. So look for stimuli, practice stimuli that are to do with that. 19 days till paper one. That's a good little reminder from Studs. Guys, it's time to strap in, dial in. You have to be dialed now, okay? If you're intending to put it all out there, leave everything on the table, or leave nothing on the table, I should say, and leave it all out there, then now's the time to do that, okay? Few weeks, you can still radically change your marks by changing your behaviors now. So as of tomorrow, why not just go as hard as you can for 3 weeks, and then you'll look back at it and say, hey, I did everything I could. I worked as hard as I could. I didn't get distracted. And then you can enjoy the fruits of your labor after it. And the fruits of your labor are going to be the satisfaction that you did everything you could and you pushed yourself beyond the boundaries of comforts and what you're used to. So there is no greater reward than that. I'll tell you that genuinely. Like, it's great to go out and you're going to have a great time after the HSC, but there is no better feeling than knowing you actually pushed yourself and went that extra mile. So push through and see how it feels. Try not to give in to the short-term impulses, and do that extra hour or two a day, and it will pay off big time, okay? And also just do the things that matter. The things that matter are probably the things you're avoiding. Like, do those hard practice questions, past papers, do those hard questions that you're avoiding, the topics that you don't want to do, and force yourself to figure it out. Go back and look at it. Ask your peers and your friends for help. Force yourself to look at the things you're uncomfortable with and the things you're avoiding, because doing an extra hour or two or forcing yourself to do that one day is going to pay a return in the exam. Okay, here we go. Sam Wren had 25 minutes to write my Module C in trials. And that's what I'm talking about. Trials was a good lesson, a good insight into what it's actually like to be in those timed conditions. And that's why I say your Module C should be under 30 minutes. It should be around 25 minutes, because you could get carried away with the essays. Now, I'm not saying to rely on a 25-minute allocation. That's the worst case scenario. What that tells me for Sam and a lot of other students is that you guys didn't do what I've been emphasizing all year, which is to time your drafts and cut them down to 32 to 34 minutes. Then you won't get in that situation in the first place. But no one wants to do the hard work and actually sit down and just write it and cut it down and actually be forced to make your writing more concise and get to the point faster. No one wants to do it. Some people do it and they do a lot better. So that's the lesson there. I mean, Studs, I missed out on half the exam. That's a great shame. The way you can avoid it is to get your drafts, time everything out, 32 to 34 minutes, cut your essays down. If that means you can only do 600 words per essay, so be it. You will get a way better mark having a full essay. I had a student do about 600 to 650 words, 18 out of 20 with 600 words. You can get a band 6. You can get a band 6 with a solid 600-word essay if it answers the question really well and it's a very sophisticated response, because you have to compensate a little bit for having less words. But if you're someone who's a slower writer and you're worried, you have to go with that and focus on quality over quantity, okay? Ray. So I'm struggling with cutting down, though. Can't decide what to remove. So Ray would love to see an example. If by some chance you can send through an example, because why don't you just, Ray, if you're still on, tell me how many words your essay is and what you need to get it to. Everyone should know their target word count. If you haven't figured out your target word count by writing out an essay, seeing how long it took, and then figuring out by working backwards what your optimal time is and optimal word count is, you need to do that. So once you write out your essay, once it gets to 34 minutes or 32 minutes, note down where you got to in the essay and figure out how many words that was. That is now your target word count that you want all of your essays to be reduced to. So figure out what your target word count is. So Ray, what's your word count currently at, and what are you trying to get it to? Is the first question. What is it currently at? What are you trying to get it to? And then, in terms of how to cut down your essays, conclusion only needs to be 2 sentences. Worst case, 1. But you need to have that, and you need to focus on the final takeaway, the final impact on the responder. Your last body paragraph, you can take out the link sentence because that's less important, especially if it comes later in the essay. The impression has already been set, right? The marker is going to look at your introduction first, then the first body. So you want those to be really strong. You don't necessarily need them to be longer than the others. There should be kind of an evenly distributed quantity of words, but you don't want to take out a link sentence out of your first body. I would start by taking things out from towards the end of the essay. Don't take out any full paragraphs because you need to have the conclusion, as I mentioned, but shorten the conclusion, take out the last link sentence from your last body paragraph, and even take out a sentence of analysis from your third body. So maybe you only have 2 examples you talk about for the third body, and then you have 3 or 4 for the first and second. Or maybe you have 4 in the first and then 3 in the second and third, right? Try and keep it relatively even, but cut down from the end of your essay and then work back up, right? Because the impression is set from your introduction and the first body. So you really don't want to be taking out words from there until the very end of this process, if that's the final thing you have to do. I mean, if you have to do that as well, you have to do it. Also, Ray, I always start by re-looking at the whole structure. If you're going to tell me that you're 250 words off your target, then that tells me you might need to take out a whole paragraph and restructure the essay. If you're doing 4 bodies, maybe you need to do 3. If you're doing 3 bodies a particular way, maybe there's another way you can do it. Like sometimes people for Module A do 4 bodies, and then I get them to merge. They merge the last 2 bodies into one, and they cut down the evidence. And they end up doing really well. And that allows them to cut down the words and finish the paper. Okay, so relook at the whole structure and then work from the end of your essays back up when you're cutting down. Look to get rid of whole sentences first. And then once you've gone through that and you find that, oh, I can't get rid of any entire sentences now. They're the essentials. Every sentence is essential. And I've cut things down to at least 2 to 3 pieces of evidence. Once you get to that point, then you reread things again and again and just try to say things more concisely. And again, if you're way off the mark, then you might need to do less body paragraphs. But if you're not way off the mark, that will almost always get you there. You just need to put in the work and the time to actually do that. What word count would you suggest just to have an idea? Again, disco zen. The point is, I don't know how fast you write. So for me, if I gave myself 34 minutes, I might be able to write 850 words. You might be able to write 1,200 words or 600 words. So what I can write in 34 minutes is almost certainly not exactly the same as what you can write in 34 minutes. That's why I can't give you a word count, because it's the wrong measure. The measure is how much can you write in 32 to 34 minutes? Because that is the proven time to allow enough time to adapt to the question on the day and prevent you from not finishing the essay. If you want to finish all your essays and feel happy that you've actually answered the question, you need to have given yourself that time in the first place. That's why teachers get annoyed at students memorizing, because they memorize and then repeat. This is about memorizing a shorter essay so that you don't repeat anything. You just have a base that you're confident with, and then all of your attention is on answering the question, and you might end up changing a lot. So you've got to do those 2 things. Now, what word count? If you're a relatively fast writer, you might be able to do 850 or something like that, but a lot of students can only actually do, I'll tell you from working with students, a lot of students do far less than they would think or you would think, right? It's more like 700 or 750. 650 for some students I'm doing at the moment, especially, if students are in English standard and they haven't put in as much work, but they still want to do really well, then they're typically a little bit slower on the writing side. 650 words is what I'm working with for some students. And then other students, we're looking at 800. Another student is 740 words. There's one student who's a bit faster, 880, 900. It's not like over 1,000 words. None of these essays are as long as you would think. You will find some students maybe some students who get top of the state, they tell you, oh, I did 1,100 words. But I know people who are at the top of the state, because I've spoken to all of them, who did less than that, who did less than 1,000 words. So don't feel like you have to do 1,000 words to get to a certain point. Yes, if you're going for high band 6, you need to have quality and quantity. You need to have enough. But the best students typically are faster at write-in, and that will give them an edge. But what my point is, for most students, you can still get a band 6 and do really well without having a 1,000-word essay. But if you are going for the very top and you are fortunate enough to be a faster writer and you've actually developed that skill, so you're skilled at writing more quickly, then of course use that advantage. That is an advantage. Let's also address that point. If you can write 1,000 words or more in 34 minutes, then do that. You should write as much as you can and prepare to write as much as you can in that allocated time. And if you're really disciplined with Mod C and you know you can do it in less than 30, you could even push that time up a bit. If we're talking about the students here who are going for 95 plus all the way up to full marks in the whole exam, then yes, try to optimize that word count and capitalize on the fact that you can write a bit faster, and you might be able to do up to 1,000 words, a little bit more maybe, but make sure you're still prioritizing the question on the day and plan accordingly. So your Mod C will have to be a bit shorter if you're doing that. Okay, again, Module C, when I'm planning for it, I'm trying to do that whole section in my practice in under 30 minutes. Well, would you say form and context should be mentioned heavily through Mod A, Essay, Hagseed, and Tempest? Yes, all of your Module A textual conversations is all about context. It's about how two texts can look at a similar idea or talk to each other, but do things in a different way or provide different perspectives because they have different contextual influences. So when you explain why there are differences or similarities, you need to link everything to context. And when you say how the texts are different in the way they've been constructed, that's all to do with form. So aim for at least two specific links to context and 2 specific links to form. These aren't full sentences. They should be integrated in your analysis. But 2 of those references per paragraph is what the better responses will do. So 2 links to context. Don't just say post-war, 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 postmodern, postmodern. You need to actually say something specific. Just say something about it being postmodern. Maybe it's the subjectivity of postmodernism. Maybe it's the fact that the form, like unreliable, like third-person limited narration is unreliable. So the fact that Margaret Atwood in Hagseed would use third-person limited narration, which is unreliable, that actually ties into the subjectivity of truth, or it casts doubt on the objectivity of truth. That is a feature of postmodernism. So if you can just make those links with form and context twice per paragraph at different stages, maybe once in a topic sentence and then once in with a piece of analysis, but in a different way each time, that would be effective. So two references to form and context per body paragraph in Module A, and in fact in every essay. How do I answer questions that require me to talk about an extract in my essay, such as 2021 HSC Mod A question? Yeah, that's a great question. So how do you answer questions that actually include an extract? I feel like I should go to an example of it. I'll see if I can pull that up very quickly in the background. Give me a second. Which one did we say? 2021. Let's have a look at it. All right, shall we have a look at an extract question? I'll talk you through a few tactics that I would use. Society of Jesus, I'm coming to your question. Okay, let's see. Present. Here we go. Hopefully you can all see this. So we want to have a look at Mod A. Here it is, textual conversations. By the way, I'm going to make some videos on how I would respond to questions from the 2023, 2022, 2021 HSC paper. I'm going to go through them in quite some depth. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, expect to see videos on YouTube of me breaking down some specific questions to really help you with that. So let's have a look at this question. Okay, so you got extracts from the different sets. So in this case, This was on Richards, but if I kept going, look, it even has moments from the docudrama. Then if we were to look at Dalloway and Hours, you get an extract from the novel and then screenshots from the film. So this is what you're talking about, right? It's these extract questions that scare students the most. I actually think they're great, right? Because they allow you to differentiate yourself pretty easily. Look at this. That's Keats Campion. Screenshots, extracts from one of the poems, right? Just because it has an extract from a particular poem doesn't mean you need to only focus on that particular poem, by the way. Okay, so these are the kinds of questions you're looking at. Let me have a look at an example. You can quickly write back, if you like, to tell me which essays you're doing, or which text you're doing, rather. So that's Ma. But I'll just take any example now. Let me see what's there for. Well, it doesn't matter. Let's do Richard. So what would I do if I got this question? How do the extracts provided contribute to a broader textual conversation between the pair of prescribed texts that you have studied? Now, what do you notice? That question is super vague. And that's the good thing, or really the hard thing, about an extract question is often the questions are quite vague, which can make it hard, but a lot of students also like that because then they can direct the focus of the argument. This is why you should prepare an essay draft really well, because now whatever argument you wanted to talk about in your draft, you could easily apply it here. It doesn't specify any theme, and Module A questions will typically do that. They'll be nice and broad based on the idea of the textual conversation rather than a specific idea. But you can get specific ideas. It's just less common. So how do the extracts provided contribute to a broader textual conversation? So that literally is allowing you to go anywhere here. The whole module is about a textual conversation between a pair of texts. So you can choose the thematic focus. What themes do you want to focus on? What complexity about a textual conversation do you want to focus on? If you had a really sophisticated draft essay with a great thesis about the value of this textual conversation, you could use that. Now, of course, you need to link in the extracts. Because the question is so broad, that means there's more emphasis on you nailing the link to these extracts, right? Because the question says, how do they contribute to a broader textual conversation? Now, that doesn't mean you don't focus on everything else in the text. It just wants you to focalize that. But they are very important because it says, how do the extracts contribute? It doesn't want an entire essay on the extracts. It says, how do the extracts contribute? But a lot of your essay needs to tie back to it. Clearly, the whole question is based on how do the extracts provided contribute to that conversation. Now, the extract, here's how you deal with an extract question. Let's get to the point. The extract is an example of how the text as a whole is talking about something or exploring something. So when you get an extract, first thought is it's just an example of a broader idea. And it's probably going to be a good extract that captures some of the key ideas of the whole text. So the extracts will be much like a theme, being asked about a theme. It's just in an extract form. And it's your job to say, within this extract, what are a couple of the key ideas that come out of it, which are going to be central to the whole text? So the extracts are examples of the broader ideas of a text. They're chosen very deliberately. It's your job to look at this extract and think, what's one or two key ideas I can see here that I can clearly link to my argument about the textual conversation? And secondly, how does this extract demonstrate the form of the text? So here it's a play, right? There's a stage direction and then there's dialogue between two characters, two bishops. Okay, so we need to address any particular aspects of the form here that could be important, because that shows that you can appreciate not just the ideas of the extract, but some specific techniques in the extract. So the same for screenshots. Understand what camera shot is used here. Is this a mid shot? Right? Is the commentary important there? Is there dialogue going on? Okay. What's the costuming? What's the maison scene of these shots here? Look, the maison scene is crowded. there are these crowds of people, okay? Hordes of people here. And you can also see this is like a mid shot with someone walking in the street. So we talk about the set in there, the mise en scene as well there. Make sure you're addressing the technique side as much as the ideas that come out from it. Now, let's do an example on this one. Even if you haven't seen this before, you're not studying it, don't worry. Like, I'll just look at this afresh. The quote, let's see what the extract's saying. See where his grace stands between two clergymen. And then Buckingham, this character says, two props of virtue for a Christian prince, to stay him from the fall of vanity, and see a book of prayer in his hand, true ornaments to know a holy man. Famous Plantagenet, most gracious prince, lend a favorable ear to our requests, and pardon us the interruption of thy devotion and right Christian zeal. Okay, so, I mean, if you were looking at that for the first time and you didn't know where that came from, you might think, oh, that's really hard. I have no idea where that quote came from or where that extract is from, right? But you need to understand, Richard's also there, the main character. And you would, if you've studied this, you would know about Richard. And enter Richard aloft between two bishops, right? And then they say, see where his grace stands between two clergymen, right? So Richard is assuming this position of authority or virtue, right? Two props of virtue for a Christian prince. So if you've studied Richard and you know how deceptive and manipulative he is, already you can think about how there is this deception and that he's fooled everyone into thinking that he is the rightful king, or he should be king. So you can link this to his deceptiveness, right? And you can also, and to his manipulative character, his Machiavellian character. You can talk about the irony, to stay him from the fall of vanity. Maybe if this is later on, when it says that the clergymen are preventing him from the fall of vanity, right? That he's actually destined, maybe that's foreshadowing his plight, his downfall, because of his pursuit of power. So you can also look at it from in that regard. The point is, what I'm doing here is I'm looking at this carefully, and this is why you need to have time to spare in an exam. You need to look at this carefully, and you need to think, what are some parts of this that I can understand? Like, okay, he's standing between two holy people, and they're saying that he needs this virtue to stay him, to prevent him from the fall of vanity, and see a book of prayer in his hand, true ornaments to know a holy man. So play upon this idea of deception, that he's actually lost his morality, and that it's ironic, that it is ironic that they're saying, oh, he's a virtuous man, when he's actually the opposite of a virtuous man. So you can play upon the irony there, talk about the pursuit of power, talk about how this will come back to bite, and that every bad deed, especially in the time of Shakespeare, has a price, right? You have a price to pay. So anyway, that's just an idea of something from there, just looking at that basically for the first time. And if I was looking at these shots, again, make sure you appreciate the actual cinematic devices, the techniques. People often miss it, and they don't focus on those parts. But then we say, all that's left is winning the people. It's an act, and these people buy it. It's a complete lie. So then you can see the correlation between the lie. Make sure you look at both of them together. We were just talking about that, how that quote was about deception. This one says it's a complete lie. Now, the lie in the case of the film might be a different type of lie because of the context. Maybe it's a more capitalist, modern context that is making a different comment. But then the lie up here is more connected to religion. So you've got the religious paradigm versus a secular paradigm that is about a different type of lying, okay? So in both cases, you have deception and manipulation, but they're applied to different contexts. And just like that, going through it, talking it over with you, we can see how you could deal with that. Now, the question then is, how do you actually address it in your essay? And you need to do it in your introduction, you need to do it in your topic sentences, and you need to use a couple of techniques. Aim for 2 per extract. So 2 from here in my Richard paragraphs, and I'll try and find at least 2 techniques here for my analysis. Integrate those into your body paragraphs to complement the other analysis that you had. So just like that, remember all the key points here. You don't only have to refer to the extracts that you're given. They should be a core example that you come back to, but you can also use your other evidence. So don't feel like you have to get rid of everything else. You should be complementing what you already had in the same order with these new quotes from the extract. Now, maybe you already referred to an extract by coincidence, but assume you didn't. Try and get one in per paragraph, that links in as a core piece of analysis. And maybe you can even substitute out something that you had before for something here that works as a good replacement. Maybe it's making a similar point. So find the right areas for the analysis. But how do you get it into your introduction? In an introduction, you're introducing your ideas, right? So when you bring in your introduction, you could say, this is just, I'm going to give you a go-to sentence starter until you get comfortable with this. But you could use this on the day. You say, as illustrated or as illuminated by the extract. Let's start there. As illustrated by the extract, comma, then go into the core ideas that are in the extract, like Shakespeare explores the power for deception, right? Or the price, the moral price of deception, and then say how he does that, and elaborate and go through whatever else you already had in your introduction. So you're blending the core elements that you wanted to introduce in your draft with the core focus of the extract. But take from the extract what works best with your understanding of the text and the argument you already wanted to make in your draft. Okay, so there's a blend in that's going on there. But if you want the sentence starter, you can replace whatever you had at the start of one of your sentences, a first or second sentence of your introduction, and say, as illustrated by the extract. Now, if you want to go one step further, if you want to do a bit better than that, you would say something specific about the form or a technique that's evident within the extract. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about the very deliberate placement of Richard between two bishops. So you might say, as illustrated, right, by the mise-en-scene of Richard standing between two bishops in the extract. Shakespeare's play, explores these core ideas about deception. Say what you're already going to say, but reframe it in terms of deception. Okay, now you should refer to each extract at least once in your introduction at different times when you talk about the first text and then the second text. And then in your topic sentences, you can also come back and say, reflected by the extract, the plays about this. And then the link sentences are also a good time to come back to the extract and talk about the core message. As I mentioned, the last component is to try and actually look at the extracts in an analytical way, and once per body paragraph for each text, get one quote that you can see a technique for and integrate it in. Even if you can't see a technique in the extract, get like something like virtue. Get a word like virtue or fall of vanity, which is like a replacement for saying downfall. So wherever you were going to say downfall in your essay, you can now quote, like you can say, instead of saying this leads to Richard's downfall, you could say it leads to his fall of vanity, fall from grace, right? So use words that work as substitutes for what you were already going to say, and use them especially in the topic sentence and the link. They don't always have to have a technique. Go for the one-worders or like a few words here. Okay, so I like fall of vanity. I would do a quick scan if I was in the exam and say, I'm going to use fall of vanity. That's a nice thing I can just replace my own words for. A book of prayer in his hand, true ornaments to know, a holy man. So his deception as a holy man or most gracious prince. I can just easily integrate that into my response at different points, and I'll try and use different ones. So I'll try and get like 4 or 5 good pieces here to integrate into my argument. Pardon us the interruption of thy devotion. Devotion is a good word. Christian zeal. The conflict between the Christian zeal and Richard's humanist nature. So use the quotes from the extract wherever you can replace your existing words. Even if they're not techniques, look for the 1 or 2 word phrases that can replace in nicely for your other words. And that could be at any point of your essay. That's what the best students do. So I haven't gone through this thoroughly actually in a live stream. I'm glad you asked that question. What I've just given you is basically the building blocks, more than the building blocks, it's the whole thing. If you can just apply what I've just told you and think about it the way I've just told you, how to use it, again, as illustrated by, say something specific about the extract, mention the extract in your introduction for each extract you're provided with. You can do this for module B and a common module as well. And make sure that you are just looking at it as an example of the overall ideas, but also an example of the form and the style. And you just make those links, and then you embed multiple quotes, multiple short quotes throughout your piece, in addition to analyzing more fuller parts there. Maybe you see a technique somewhere there Maybe you talk about a metaphor that's going on there, or a motif, or dramatic irony might be something that is in there as a technique. So techniques, but also words that you can substitute with. Hopefully that helps. I feel like that's kind of how you can nail the extract question. Okay, Sam Wren. Apologies, we got carried away with the Q&A here. I did want to answer questions because a lot of people probably wondering these things. I've got some drafts lined up. I might have to, and I won't defer it too long, I promise. I will try and do it in the next few days, certainly by early next week. I might have to do a separate session where I just look at, I've got about 3 or 4 drafts that people have submitted for review. So I will get back to that as soon as I can. I feel like I need to finish a couple more of these questions, and then I'll come to this in a separate one. So have to be patient with me on that one. Sorry, I just wanted to prioritize these questions that people had. Okay, now, Society of Jesus. Love the Jesuits, went to a Jesuit school. So let's have a look at your question. And I'll get out of this. Here's the question. Thank you so much for this live stream. I've got a question. How can I make my Mod C draft be able to answer more questions? Should I include certain themes or ideas so it fits the question Nessa asks? So 2 things on this. I've already covered them a little bit. 1, you should be writing about a core moment of tension that is in a prescribed text that you studied. So the text that you should be using the stylistic elements from, like you might be using a particular type of imagery, or you might be writing it with unreliable first-person narration, or you might be using a stream of consciousness style, because they were the techniques used by an author that you studied in a prescribed text. So you're using stylistic features, but also make sure what you're writing about links to a core concern or moment of tension in that same text. So you're not only basing your draft off, it doesn't have to be the same thing, it has to be connected, loosely connected to a core concern, idea, or moment of tension in that text that you also borrowed the techniques from in terms of how to write. So that's the first thing. That will let you be more flexible for different types of questions, because that will help you with questions that specify certain elements of a prescribed text. And secondly, you use life. I went over life. When you see a stimulus, don't just think, oh, I have to interpret it literally. You can see a stimulus, see an idea, and say, how do I apply it figuratively? How can I make a metaphor out of that? How can I make it a motif throughout my piece? How can I actually, how can I actually use that stimulus to reflect the mental state or the emotions of my character, but it doesn't have to be directly from them, or it doesn't have to be the actual setting that they're living within. So when you see a stimulus, don't think, oh, no, that doesn't work. Think it does work, but I have to use it symbolically. Like, is there a symbolic value to the stimulus that will then allow you to mold your original draft? So they're the 2 things. One is making sure you've got the right things in the draft to begin with, and then thinking nice and broadly, nice and figuratively about the stimulus on the day. So one is for you to prepare now. One is for you to practice to do on the day. How would I analyze form for a prose fiction novel? Yeah, 1984, form. Okay, so there's different layers of form, and I'm using form very generally, but the fact it's prose fiction, first of all, is the highest level of form. That's the type of text that it is. Some people are studying plays, crucible, dramatic form. Prose fiction form, the prose fiction form is important, right? Because it allows, I'm going to look at it for 1984. If we think about prose fiction form, what does that allow? I mean, you've got to think, what does it allow? What's the impact on the responder? So if I write something in prose fiction that's more fluid, that's more conversational and expansive, I think in 1984, the prose fiction form allows Orwell, this is what it allows for, it allows Orwell to construct or to really, how should we say it, to amplify the dystopian limits of the world that he creates. He creates this fictional world, and he needs fiction, by the way. The fact that it's fiction is important because it's made up to create this dystopian scenario that's actually intended to frighten us into action and wake us up. But the fact it's prose fiction, that it's not like a play, that it's got so much set in and it's elaborate and it's got a plot, the fact that it's prose fiction, I think, allows Orwell to amplify the dystopian limits of the world that he creates, which means he's able to achieve his purpose by really immersing us in this comprehensive world of totalitarianism. Okay, so if we look at it as prose fiction, that's why that's important. If it was a film, you'd be able to see it and you would immerse visually, but it wouldn't be left to your imagination. I think the fact that the reader, because it's prose fiction and it's written down and it's not a film, so always think about, you can understand the importance of the form by thinking about what it is not. It's not a film. A film would still immerse you and it would still tell a story, but it limits your conception of the world because the director has set up the world in a particular way. With a novel, your imagination leads you down your own path here. So that's important for this world because it means that the reader creates their own personal dystopian world. It's not imposed upon them. I think that's a really key point that basically no one talks about. So that's the prose fiction element at the top level. Then you've got things like the narration style, third-person limited narration. Okay, Winston's perspective is focalized. It's third-person limited narration. So we understand the story through the lens of Winston, the protagonist. So that humanizes his experience. The effect of it is it humanizes his experience. That's the narration style. It's also got a tripartite, one word, structure. So it's split up into these three structures, and you can think about why that's important for the progression of the narrative. Okay, and that's probably a broader point that's kind of hard to pinpoint a specific focus for that, but you can think about how the plot develops or how Winston's sense of hope regresses over the course of the tripartite structure. So it kind of traces that initial hope all the way back to despair. And you could say that it's facilitated by the three-part or tripartite structure. So you've got prose fiction, third-person limited narration, the structure. What about the genre? The fact it's dystopian, the fact it's speculative, into the future, futuristic, the fact that it's satirical. It's a satire. It's not real life. It's stretching reality to its extreme, most absurd form to illuminate and expose the absurdity and the horror of totalitarianism. So there's 4 solid points you can make that connect to the prose fiction nature of it, the narration, the structure, and the genre, right? And there's lots of different elements of genre: satire, realism, speculative, okay, and dystopian. The list goes on. So make sure you address different parts throughout different parts of your essay. You can make connections at different stages, and that will that will freshen the essay up, and it will mean you're not repetitive. You're not constantly going back to the one thing, and it means you'll have enough ammunition, so to speak, to deploy in each paragraph. Okay, and that will create a really sophisticated response. Spectral Void, Year 10, great to see you in here. Hope you stay tuned in. I'm just seeing here what your question is. How would you suggest I improve in English to prepare for my HSC? So you're preparing early. Awesome to see. In my last essay, I got 18 out of 20. My teacher said I need to improve more context to make it more sophisticated. Yeah, so you probably didn't have enough context, so you need to research the contextual influences behind your text more. Things like Google and ChatGPT are a good starting place there, of course, in addition to what you're learning in class. Be careful with what GPT tells you about context. But I would ask GPT to provide a list, say, of 10 specific contextual influences on my text. Of course, you can also look at the Jeddle resources for your text as well. We've already done the filtering there. But GPT will give you things to look at. You then need to go and verify those with your own research on Google or resources like Jeddle, and dig deeper into it. But you need to have a list of very specific contextual links that you can embed throughout your analysis. So make it a goal of yours to introduce something about the overall context in your introduction, and then in every body paragraph, try and have 2 specific contextual links. So first thing was, you're probably not doing it enough. Second thing is, you're probably not being specific enough when you do it. So if you refer to context, try to avoid just saying things like, inspired by the Cold War or the post-war period or romanticism. Say something about it. You need to give me a feature of that time period. You need to tell me the significance or value of that contextual influence. And it might be a personal contextual influence. Maybe you're saying something about the author that's important to what they're saying. Be specific about it. So I understand the point about being more sophisticated. That often comes from not being specific enough and not doing it enough. But I would say work on saying things like, let's say you're doing the Cold War period or post-World War II. Instead of saying influenced by the post-war period, say something about it. Influenced by or shaped by not just the post-war period or the post-war era, but by the existential uncertainties of the post-war era. So you're telling me a feature of that period. You're telling me why it's important that it's post-war. Well, after World War II, everyone was questioning everything. Everyone was uncertain. Everyone was in fear. So there was a global panic, a state of global anxiety. So inspired by the state of global anxiety in the post-war period, it's saying that specific thing about the period that's going to help you be more sophisticated. Best advice for how to improve a Mod B essay. I got 16 out of 20 leading up to the HSC. How do I get that to a band 6? Because you're just at the top of band 5 based on the 16 out of 20. Do you recommend viewing a lot of critics to really boost the quality of my essay? I don't think critics are going to be the difference between a 16 and a 19 or a 20. There are so many variables. It's very hard for me to give you a specific advice without seeing your essay, because there are multiple reasons why you might not have got a band 6. But I can answer, do I think using a lot of critics will boost the quality? Only partially. A lot of people do it wrong. When you use a critic, if you refer to a critic, including a quotation from the critic in your essay, first of all, only do it a couple of times, maybe 2 times or once per paragraph. Don't do it in your introduction. And if you do refer to a critic, make sure that it sounds like they are backing up your point of view or you are disagreeing with them. Don't write it in a way where the critic that you're referring to is making the point for you. Make your point and then say, validated by, or this is supported by, or which is a view supported by, or which aligns with critics' perspective that, and then add a short quote. So short quotes with the critics, and make sure they're backing up your point. They're not making the point for you, because it's a personal response, the Mod B. So the critic has to be supporting your point of view, not making it for you. So that might be a factor. It's not absolutely essential. There should kind of be, you're meant to study critics and critical perspectives, but in terms of what's in your essay, you don't have to have multiple references to critics to do well. I've seen students get full marks with no references to critics. So it's not essential, but if you do it, make sure that it's not replacing your own words. So it can be almost more dangerous than advantageous. There's probably other reasons why you didn't get a Mod A. We've probably talked about a few, but that's something to think about. In year 11, Disco Zen. By the way, I hope you guys are checking out Jeddle.com. There's lots of new updated resources on there. And we've also got Jedd-AI as well. We're still developing that, iterating that. If you want to get instant feedback on your essays, you can go to Jedd-AI, and you can also ask someone from our team who will get back to you with specific practical feedback on the changes you need to make to your essays to improve them. So how are you going to get higher marks? You need to get feedback on your essays. You can ask the team by subscribing to Jedd-AI. So you can check that out at Jeddle.com. Okay, Disco Zen says, I have no idea about discursive. Do you suggest over these holidays I practice discursives? Well, if you have no idea about them, first of all, learn what they are. And you can research, have a look at Jeddle's videos on YouTube. We've got videos that will explain what a discursive is. Yes, get familiar with what a discursive is. And then I would start by reading examples of discursive writing. Once you've read examples, try just recreating one paragraph of a discursive piece that you've read. I think that would be the starting point for me to get comfortable with it, and then you can kind of dive deeper over time. But shoot me through an email at Jeddle when you're up to that point, and I can definitely do some more content on discursives if that's something that you're having trouble with, and that way I can help others as well who are in a similar boat. So I'll probably make some videos on that to help you get started. But shoot me an email via the Jeddle website, and can make sure we address that for you. 1 to 2 critics. Try not to load essay with critics. Yes. And if using 2 critics, ensure they're on separate paragraphs. Yes, Fatima. Good summary. You could, if you have 3 bodies, you could have 1 reference per paragraph, but not essential. Best way to prepare for section 1, the unseen questions section, is to do practice papers and to be revising the techniques and to know off by heart how you would structure a response to different mark allocations. If it's a 3-marker, 3 sentences. I've got lots of kind of very popular videos, actually. There's some of our most popular videos on YouTube. Look at Jeddle's YouTube. Look at how to respond to different section 1 questions in terms of structure, and that will help you. And then do lots of practice, especially the 5 markers. That's where students lose a lot of marks. 5 and 6 markers. They don't like the longer ones. You've got to be really efficient with your time and prioritize the longer mark questions on the day. So I think I addressed that comment, hopefully. Sam, going to get to it in the next review. Seems like there's just a lot of Q&A here. Best way to memorize key parts of an essay. Best way to memorize is, I always use the old look, cover, write, check method. So when you're memorizing an essay, something I've always found super helpful is to learn it like a speech. So have a printout copy of the essay, of the parts of the essay that you want to learn, and then read those parts one by one off the page. Start with the first part, read it out, and then put the paper down. Don't look at the paper. So this is the look, cover. Instead of writing it out again and checking, say it out loud. So it's like look, cover, write, check, but it's look, cover, speak, say it out loud, and then check. And if you said the sentence correctly, move on to the next part. And then if you say the second part correctly, say both of them together, and then keep adding more layers and add in more sentences. The key thing is, if you get it wrong, if you forget part of the sentence or you forget a key part of the sentence that you're trying to learn, you have to focus on where you forgot that part and then say it again. And you don't allow yourself to move on until you can say the full thing without looking, even if it's not a full sentence, but it's a part of a sentence like a quote. Once you have learnt all of the key parts of each paragraph, so say you did the introduction and you learnt the key parts of the introduction, practice writing it out before you move on to the next paragraph. So you do sentence by sentence by sentence, look, cover, say it out loud without looking, get it right, check, move on, add to the next sentence, get to the end of the paragraph, write it out now. So you write it out to lock it in, and write it out to lock it in. I like how that sounds. And then next paragraph, do the same. So that's a key way to memorize. The other key tactic that I found is really helpful is once you've looked at an essay, if you want to remember, like say you've read over the essay a lot, but you don't want to have to remember it word for word, because word for word can get you into trouble, right? You're trying to remember every single word, and you might be better off just remembering the key parts of the sentence like you're suggesting here. So what I would do is in every single sentence of my essay, I would highlight one word or phrase per sentence of the essay that is going to act as a trigger word. So using trigger words is important here. You have a trigger word or phrase that, if read or if remembered, will remind you of the rest of the sentence. So what's a key word or phrase in that sentence that's unique to that sentence, and it kind of speaks to the overall point? Maybe it's a key word that you don't say anywhere else. Maybe it's a theme, but it's probably something quite specific. It might be a trickier word that you've wanted to include. And if you remember that word, as long as you've read over the sentence and practiced your essay a lot of times, by memorizing just that one trigger word per sentence, that will often be a trigger for the rest of the sentence. And then it all comes back to you. So read over your essay, practice doing different questions and writing them out, and have that one highlighted word per sentence, or maybe it's in a quote, that will remind you of the rest of it. So look for that word and focus on what that word is. So I think trigger words and going over sentences like a speech before writing them out are the key tactics I would use. All right, I'll keep going for a bit longer, guys. We've got to wrap up soon, but I'm going to answer a couple more questions that are coming in. For Module B, T.S. Eliot, would you recommend a focus on 2 key poems and still have good ideas about the remaining 3? Yeah, so what's my recommendation for Eliot? Some people have different approaches. Some teachers say just focus on 2 poems. I like having 3 poems, okay? 3 poems, so you have 1 paragraph per poem that each advance the argument you're making. So put them in a very deliberate order. For instance, you might have Journey of the Magi as the last paragraph because Maybe that kind of sums up the argument, or not sums up the argument, that's the wrong way of saying it, but maybe it kind of speaks to whether there's a resolution, or like the what next element. Whereas you might start with something like preludes or rhapsody that's just conveying this sense of alienation, spiritual alienation. By the end of the essay, you're saying, where can we get that spiritual fulfillment from then? So it's kind of answering a question or a problem that was posed earlier in the essay. So 3 poems, 1 poem as the focus of each paragraph in a 3-paragraph essay is my go-to structure. I would then be very familiar with the other 2, or if you're doing 2 poems for your essay, be familiar with the other 3, yes. And just know 2 to 3 quotes, probably 3 quotes from each of the other poems that you haven't included in your draft essay. What you can also look at doing, and I would probably avoid this, teachers don't tend to like this as much, is in a paragraph, you could focus on 1 poem, but you could refer to another one at some point. Like you could make a cross-referencing other poems. You could do 1 of those per paragraph, per poem. So you have a primary poem, and then you refer to another one that backs it up, showing that you're looking at a study of the whole collection, not just 1 poem per idea. So cross-referencing can allow you to get all 5 poems in the 1 essay, because you have 3 primaries and you make subtle direct references to those 2 other poems at different parts where relevant. But just in case you're asked about a specific poem, you should have 2 to 3 quotes, and you should know the ideas and what they're about for the other 2 or 3 poems that you're not going to put into your draft. Yeah, as I mentioned, integrating critics, it's very short quotes. If you are going to include a critic, I would not include them in your introduction. The introduction needs to be your argument. And if you do include a critic for Eliot, you've looked up a critic and there's a point of view that you like or that's interesting, get a very short quote from something the critic has written and make sure they are the words of the quote. Make sure it's short, not a full sentence, a short quote, and use it to back up your point. Or you might disagree with a perspective if you're getting really advanced. You might disagree with it and say, whereas the critic, and mention the critic's last name, then quote the critic, say, whereas this critic, say their name, contends or argues that this, with the quote, comma, then say your point of view. Say it is in fact this. Or just say your point of view, like this is all within your analysis. So you've got a quote, then you're saying what the quote means. This reflects this idea, comma, which is reinforced, or which then let the critic kind of add to your point, but have already made your core point. Then say which is amplified by, or which this critic has termed this. Maybe they have a specific name for what you're describing. So you can kind of be playful with the way you integrate the critic. Don't put too much emphasis on it. It'd be once per paragraph. Maybe you could just do it in 2 paragraphs. That's what I did. When I did a Mod B essay with critics, I just had 2 specific references, 1 in 2 of my 3 paragraphs, and I didn't worry too much about them. It's mainly got to be your argument. All right, let's see. Oscar, how do you get from a 13 to a 16? Okay, well, now you're talking about like difference between like a band 4 and a band 5. Okay, like what's the difference between an essay that's in the 70s, which is like a 13, to 80s, which is a 16. And you can basically guarantee yourself a band 5, 80s, if you just follow an analytical structure. So the thing about a band 4, an essay that gets like a 13, is it probably doesn't have enough analysis that is specific to the text. Okay, it's probably just missing a lot of core elements. Like it storytells, it's a bit descriptive, it doesn't have a clear argument, but it also is probably not presenting any key ideas. Like I talked about being specific. A 13 is probably just providing a very vague idea in the topic sentence. Like it's not really getting to the context. It's not getting to the specific, sophisticated point. And then after that, you've probably got very basic techniques and you're not engaged. And sometimes you're storytelling, you're just describing what's happening. You're not actually saying the significance of something. These are a couple of the trends. The other thing is, your techniques are probably limited. So you're just talking about metaphors, similes. You're not talking about the form of the text. You're not talking about the fact that it's a play, that it has soliloquies and why that's important. Well, a soliloquy is candid and it actually allows the audience insight. It provides the audience insight into the inner thoughts of the character. Going into specific detail about the form, not just focusing on basic quotes with basic techniques, is going to get you from a 13 to something like a 16. And then it's going to be the quality of your argument. Like how good are the ideas that you're bringing in? How specific are they? And is your essay structured in a way where you're moving forward? A 13 essay probably just has 3 themes that are randomly ordered, and you just talk about theme 1, theme 2, theme 3. Here are 3 quotes for each one. It's not structured in a way where it's saying, here's the problem, and then here's the next idea that comes from that idea, and then here's the final resolution. And you're kind of going through the text in that way, making those arguments that are extending on each other. I mean, look, there are a few factors. I'd have to see an essay to tell you why you got a 13 and not a 16. But there are a few of the trends. I will ignore the extension ones for now. I do have advice for the extension modules. It's great that you went well in the assessments, but overwhelmed for prepping for the HSC. Patrick, shoot me a message as well. I want to do some stuff on extension. I'm going to leave that for now because that's taking us into another subject, mainly focusing on standard and advanced for this. But great question. I do want to help with extension, and I do have some really good advice for you on that. Send me an email. Just go to the contact page on the Jeddle website, or message me at Jonny@Jeddle.com. No H in Jonny, Jonny. And I will come back to you on that. Just looking at a couple of other questions that I can answer quickly. What would you say is the strongest structure when analyzing 2 texts, like poems? Would you say combining the poems in each paragraph or writing about each poem? Like if we were doing something like a module B, I would just do 1 poem per paragraph because it's easier to do that well. If you integrate poems within a paragraph, you can kind of be a little bit abrupt and superficial. Like you talk about 1 poem for a second, and then now you're already onto another poem. So I would prefer the in-depth approach where you just stick on 1 poem for the most part within a paragraph and then do another poem for another paragraph. So you can do some integrations, but I would minimize it at first unless you're really comfortable with it, because it can lead to you kind of bouncing between poems and not getting the depth that's required for that individual poem. So focus on 1 poem per paragraph. Yeah, so Teresa, similar to Patrick, send me an email. We'll go over extension 1 in a separate video, and I can also probably shoot you over some advice in the meantime. Yeah, reflections for Module C, just going to direct you to the YouTube videos that I made on Module C reflections for the craft of writing. Have a look at those. They'll have the structures that I recommend. Yeah, I think you need to refer to a couple of stylistic features that you have used. I would focus on 2, 1 paragraph on each. Make sure you're focusing on the impact. What impact do you want to have on the responder, on your reader? That's going to be the thing that separates you. In a Mod C reflection, have you addressed your purpose in terms of the impact that you wanted to have on the person reading your work? That frame is the frame you need to employ for a reflection. That's what a lot of students don't do, and then they end up getting like 4 out of 8 or 5 out of 8 max. If you want to get 7 or 8, it needs to be about how are you influencing the responder, and how did the person you studied do it in theirs? How have you done it? And kind of sometimes how successful were you? But I kind of don't like the whole thing we have to say, oh, I did it effectively. But sometimes you have to reflect on what you've learned. But I would mainly just be showing how you have consciously used a technique that you studied to create a very specific effect on the reader that connects to your overall ideas. And focus on 2 stylistic elements with 2 examples of each one for the paragraphs, and then have an example of how the author you studied did each of them. You can have 1 example per paragraph for how the composer did it. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Roland, if you submitted, if you guys are still submitting essays for review via the link that we have for this session, keep doing so, and I'll get to as many as I can in the next review video. Hannah says, I've had 2 teachers look over my imaginative piece. One really liked it and the other didn't. Is there a way to guarantee the HSC markers liking it, since English is very subjective? Yeah, if only you could guarantee that everyone in the world liked you, I suppose, right? Same thing. Can you guarantee that everyone's going to like you? No one is ever going to be liked by everyone. Often the more kind of popular or out there you are, the more divided people are about you. So very hard to be liked by all. Very hard for every HSC marker to like your English essay. However, they are still objective to a certain extent. Like there is a certain list of criteria, and there are models and exemplars that the markers have for each range of marks. So they know the kinds of essays that match up to a band 6 and a band 5, and they have examples, and they go through this set kind of checklist almost that they have to look at. So there are ways to do it. Imaginative is particularly tough. Essays are easier for them to do quite objectively. And then for an imaginative, I would be focused on the way you're writing, like the cohesiveness of your writing versus the idea, because some people might love the idea of your piece, some might not. I wouldn't worry too much about the idea, like what you're writing about. Instead of worrying about what you're writing about, which not everyone might like, there are certain things that everyone could probably agree on. Like every HSC marker could probably agree that even if they didn't like the idea of your piece, yeah, that was really well written, or that had a very consistent voice, or there was lots of great descriptions in that piece. So use lots of imagery, use lots of descriptive language, use really effective extended metaphors. Maybe you just pick one and you have it throughout. Those are things that people can't argue about. And they're like, oh yeah, that's good writing, and that's clearly inspired by something you learned from the prescribed text. So worry more about how you're writing than what you're writing about, because the how you're writing is the only thing that people are probably going to be able to agree on, absolutely, than the subjective nature of the idea that you're exploring. I only started studying HSC today, and I cooked. 19 days to go. You're okay. You're okay. As long as you start now. I mean, it all depends on how prepared you were for trials. So assuming you had really great drafts and, as long as you didn't get like 10 out of 20 and everything, and you have so much work to do for all of your subjects, I don't think I would describe it as a cooked situation, but I think you need to get onto it. With 2.5 weeks, this is probably the absolute limit. Like if you're watching this video now, for everyone watching this, you're watching it at the right time. Now is the time to kick into action if you haven't already, because this is like the latest that you could be starting. And I hope that you got some decent results in the trials so that you didn't have, tons of work to do and cover the whole course, for instance. But yeah, I wouldn't leave it any later than now, but you got plenty of time. It all depends on your goals, doesn't it? Like if you're aiming for a 50 ATAR, then you're fine to start now, and you probably don't have to do that much. But if you're aiming for a 99.95 ATAR, then yeah, you need to be doing full days, fully focused, have a very specific game plan, know exactly where your areas of weakness are, know how you're going to get every mark, and do lots of practice questions for every subject. That would be if you're aiming for top of the state. So it does depend on your goals. Just from a personal perspective, like if you just want to not let yourself down and not regret, oh, I should have just worked a little bit harder, then it's not too late for that. I think now if you go hard out between now and your final exam, which is still probably going to be 4 to 5 weeks, you'll feel really good about yourself afterwards. I mean, that whole question might have been completely sarcastic, but genuine feedback from me. Roland we'll have a look at later. I'm going to have to do it in a separate video to answer your subsequent question. When will I have a look at the paragraphs? I'm going to try and get to them. Other people have submitted. I've got to be fair. You might not be, you're not going to be first. I know that there are others in line. You can use Jedd-AI in the meantime. Jedd-AI will give you priority access. We've got a team of markers looking at essays that are submitted. So if you really need that feedback urgently, then you have to use Jedd-AI, and you can sign up to that through Jeddle. Otherwise, the free feedback I'm doing, you have to wait in line, and I'll be looking at it in the next review video that I do, hopefully in the next few days, by early next week. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully that helped. Just going to keep it to Q&A because we've already been going for 100 minutes. And, I think who was it saying that they're cooked? I'm going to get to the cooked stage soon. So gonna rest the brain now. And I will be back soon with some more content. I'm going to do lots of question breakdowns. Really enjoy going through past question papers, like those extract questions, actually showing you how you would break it down and think about it, and providing some examples of ideas that you could explore. So YouTube will have more of those videos. Otherwise, in the meantime, Jeddle.com has our resources, and you can sign up to Jedd-AI if you want to get instant AI feedback, but also ask people from our team to give you personalized feedback on how you can improve your essays. Now's the time to sign up. You can just sign up for 1 month if you are only here for a month, but if you're in year 10 or 11, you can get you'll get a discount for the annual access, which I recommend. And then that way we can work with you throughout the year. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Good luck with your study, and I'll be back soon. Good luck.